for joining us. To AICHO is the importance of culture in recovery presentation with our special guest, Sharyl Whitehawk, who is a Lakota Ojibwe tribal member, addictions counselor, trainer, and teacher. I just want to let everyone know that we are going to be recording the session tonight, and that's for people that aren't able to join us but want to learn as well. So just do a really quick introduction. My name is Leanne Littlewolf. I'm the co-executive director of the American Indian Community Housing Organization. I use she, her pronouns. Indigo Mainga Nindu Dame Dash Gazaga Squajame Cogna Unjaba. So my traditional name is Everyday, and I belong to the Wolf Clan, and I come from Leech Lake. I'm a tribal citizen of Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. And before we get started, I'm going to ask everyone to please put in the chat which tribal lands that you reside on. I am coming here live from my home in Duluth. I live in Onikan, Duluth, which is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Northern Cheyenne, and other tribal nations. And before I turn it over to my colleague Ivy, I'd like to inform you a little bit about the American Indian Community Housing Organization, AICHO, who is hosting tonight's event. AICHO is an Indigenous-led, people-first nonprofit organization in Duluth, where we provide housing, domestic violence emergency shelter, family and cultural programming, cultural arts center, Indigenous-centered retail space, Indigenous First, Indigenous food sovereignty initiatives, and more. All of our work is anchored in our mission to honor the resiliency of Indigenous people by strengthening communities and centering Indigenous values in all aspects of our work. Our philosophy is that every American Indian person deserves to live in a nonviolent and non-threatening environment and has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. AICHO is really fortunate to have the support of funding partners like St. Louis County Public Health, Minnesota Department of Health, our Minnesota Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Division, who help us to bring cultural and spiritual knowledge information, sharing sessions like this to our community. Tonight's presentation is the first in a series of 3 virtual Indigenous health-focused webinars that AICHO is leading in partnership with the St. Louis County Public Health. In the future, on October 12th, Sharon Day will share about the Indigenous response to HIV/AIDS in our communities. And on October 19th, Francis Sacco and Frank Goodwin will present on Indigenous cultural and community response to mental health and well-being. These sessions are free and open to the public. Registration is required. To find out more, go to AICHO's website at www.aicho.org, and we'll put that in the chat room or the chat as well. Now I will turn it over to Ivy for the introduction for Sharyl Whitehawk. Which.
All right. Bonjour, everyone. Bonjour in Dinawe Magana Dog. Nigan Kamaguk Indigo Ojibwe Mong Gitchio Nigamin and Dunjaba Adik Nindudame O Nigamin Sin and Da AICHO and Dunano Ki. Hello, everyone. My name is Ivy Vineo. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the culture programming coordinator for the American Indian Community Housing Organization. And thank you, Miigwech, for joining us today. I am a direct descendant of a Grand Portage band of Ojibwe tribal member. And before I introduce Sharyl Whitehawk for tonight's session, I want to go over the Zoom rules with everyone real quick. If we're going to keep you all muted. There may be a time at the end where we will unmute where you can ask questions. Otherwise, if you want to ask your question, you can do that in the chat. I will be moderating that, and we will be having a Q&A at the end of Sharyl's presentation. Becky Nelson is on this call, and she is our Zoom tech person, and we're very fortunate that she volunteers for all of our cultural online series of events. And if you have any questions like technologically about Zoom or anything, you could private chat her and she can walk you through your questions. We are recording tonight's session, and I will be sending out an email after this presentation tonight to all of those that registered with this recording link, as well as the survey link, which we hope all of you will just take a few minutes to give us your feedback. And then also what else? The Zoom link. Oh, I forgot what I was, sorry. Anyways, I'll think of it later. I also want to say miigwech thank you to Mishkowzwin Treatment Center on the Fond du Lac Ojibwe Reservation for partnering with us for this important session. I'm so thankful and grateful for Sharyl Whitehawk for providing us this cultural presentation with her time, effort, knowledge, and experience. As we know, addiction added with historical trauma has negatively impacted our Indigenous families for generations. In St. Louis County in northeastern Minnesota, where Duluth is, and I'm sure this is true for all Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, opioid and other addictions have risen over the recent years, and the pandemic hasn't helped matters. In 2021, 691 American Indians in St. Louis County were admitted to chemical dependency treatment. And as of July 2022, our county has had 316 total opioid-related overdoses, with an expected total of 525 by the end of the year, with 18 fatalities this year just in Duluth. I could be spouting stats all this whole session, but I'm going to stop there. AICHO does encourage you to and challenge you all to look into the research on how this epidemic impacts our Indigenous families and diverse communities and individuals of all ages. Becky will be placing into the chat resource links. That's what I forgot, that I'll include in the email as well. But in the chat, she'll put some resource links that you can check out later after tonight's session. We can help our community together if we educate ourselves and connect to our Indigenous ways of healing, culture, traditions, connections to the land and with each other, and to our language. I mailed Cheryl some AICHO months ago when I asked her to lead the session, and I'm so glad that she accepted. I also this morning put out AICHO in my prayer, and I asked for protection and guidance and just, you know, acceptance for Cheryl and for all of us that are on this call, and for all of those who are battling sobriety and those who are in recovery. So I just wanted to let you know that I did that. So Sharyl Whitehawk is an enrolled tribal member of the Lakota Band of Ojibwe in Wisconsin. She is a level 3 addictions counselor and LADC at the Khunsi Onikan Native Women's Treatment Program at the American Indian Family Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was the first director of the Women's Wellbriety Lodge, an inpatient treatment center on the White Earth Ojibwe Reservation, and she is also a trainer and consultant for White Bison Incorporated Wellbriety for over 15 years, specializing in helping Native American communities across the United States and Canada to heal from unresolved grief, loss, and traumas, domestic and sexual violence, and alcoholism and addictions. Miigwech Cheryl for all that you do and all that you give to all of our communities, and we are so thankful to have you here with us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cheryl. Miigwech. Oh, you're on mute.
Bonjour and good morning. Greetings, all my relatives. Mikwamintikwe Indigo, Ginu Yudin, Odawa Zagai Gunning in Donjaba, Giwon Shagamud and Dad. I am originally from the Courte band of Ojibwe. I am Eagle Clan. I live where there's fish in the still water, and work in St. Paul. I'm really honored to be here tonight. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I believe in it very much. I have a lot of experience. I grew up with both alcoholic parents, and pretty much most all of my family on both sides issues with alcoholism and addiction, and a lot of dysfunction, a lot of verbal, mental, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. And so that, like, for a lot of us, you know, what's sad is that my story is very common in Indian country. So I want to talk a little bit about what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. So then when we talk about solutions, and I believe culture is a solution, it'll make more sense. But a little bit more about myself. I did end up having, despite the fact that I said I would never be like my parents, I ended up with an alcohol and drug problem in addiction, and it almost killed me. At the end, I was vomiting blood and peeing blood and passing blood, and I ended up in relationships that were extremely violent, that where I was held hostage, and the person tried to kill me on several occasions. So I was brought to my knees in both situations of life or death, you know, and luckily I even had some survivor guilt about it, because so many of the people that I knew in my family and all around did not get help and get out of that lifestyle. I think it wasn't a choice for me. I got very suicidal at a certain point, and if I would have stayed in that, living that life, I don't think I would have lived very long. But there were people who ended up, it was a very spiritual experience, what happened to me that I did sober up. I felt like, even though I grew up in a home where we didn't get the good stuff, we didn't get the culture. It was a desert for culture in my family. We got the drinking and the violence and all the fallout of historical trauma and intergenerational trauma, but we didn't get the good stuff. But there were people around me who had some of that. I had a best friend when I was about, 10, 11, 12 years old, and her family did not drink. That was like, I didn't think there was such a thing, but they were very cultural, and they were powwow people. And for 2 summers, they took me with them on the powwow trail, in the powwow circuit. So I did get a glimpse of something else, and I really wanted it. I thought, if I ever have a family someday, this is how I want to raise my family. So some seeds got planted. And there were people along the way who I look back now and I think, oh, they must have known, what was going on at my house, teachers, my friends' parents. I think they let me stay at their house as much as I wanted to, which was really a blessing. So when I was bottoming out with my drinking, at that point I had been viewing a lot of violence from first memory, and both the physical and sexual violence happened to me when I was, the first time I was physically assaulted by my father, I was still in the crib, and the first time that he molested me, I was 3 years old. And then after that, there were multiple people. different people of my relatives. And then as I got older, other people outside of my family, that's when it got really hard because I thought, where is their safety? So I developed survival skills that ended up being not very good for me. And I didn't realize that for a long time. But were natural for someone trying to survive what I was living through. I was the oldest child, and I felt really responsible for my younger siblings and my mother, and took care of them. And that was kind of my role in the family. So at this point in time in my life, I have quite a long period of time of sobriety. When I reached out for help, there was no money for treatment. And I did what someone told me was, the old school way of 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor, do what they say. And I did that. But I also realized that wasn't going to be enough. It was powerful. It was teaching me healthier coping skills, definitely. I was meeting people who lived a different kind of life, who had goals of happiness and sobriety. Those were all really good things. But I also realized that I was probably going to need therapy. I looked for therapy for a long time, and talk therapy did not help me. I met a lot of really nice counselors and therapists who did it, but it didn't touch, the stuff that I had going on with me was a lot of it. At that point, I didn't have a memory of. I had become a person that I had blocked memories, and I also would disassociate when things got really hard. And so the kind of level of mental health care I needed, I think, was pretty deep. What did happen, though, was that, and I completely feel like there's spiritual things going on here. When I was a little girl, I would go out in the woods and I would lay down on the ground and I would try to stop breathing because I didn't want to be alive. And when that would happen, there would be people that would come around me and they looked older. And so I thought of them as my grandmas and grandpas. That's what I called them. But they would whisper things in my ear, things that I wasn't hearing at home. Things like, you're not alone. We love you. We're proud of you. You can't give up. There's things that you're supposed to do someday. You have to get up. You have to go back. But just remember, we're with you. When on Reservation Dogs, recently, they had that one scene with where all the ancestors were standing behind her. I cried because I was like, that's what happened to me. I do not doubt that that's a real thing, that our ancestors walk with us, our relatives on the other side. But when I started drinking, I couldn't see them anymore. They didn't come to me. And later on, when I was in my 20s, my grandma, before she passed away, she was a boarding school survivor. And she never wanted to talk about her past or her family. It was like, you did not ask, because she was this real tiny, meek and mild woman, unless you asked her about her past, and then she'd get really angry. So everyone would back off and nobody would ask her things except me, because I wanted to know all the time. But so I don't know if that was why she thought to call me, but one day she said, Cheryl, come over. I need to show you something. So I went to see her and she said, someone found a picture of her mother, and she showed it to me. And I started to cry because the main lady that used to come and say those things to me when I would be laying on the ground and wanting to die, it was her. And later I found out, after my grandma died, that how that great grandma of mine, she died from the violence of her husband. He was an alcoholic, and he was a survivor of residential school in Canada. And he married my great grandma, who was a survivor of boarding school in the States. And it made sense to me. It just made sense that, wow, what killed her, she came back to help me survive. And that part of me had wondered, why me? Why did I get to survive? Why did I find something else? And the answer came back. You know, at the time that I sobered up, Creator was talking to me. Creator was in my life. And all I had to be was still and quiet. And answers would come and messages would come for me. And the message was, the gift of recovery came with responsibility, that I had to turn around and give back. And so that's been a pretty constant in my life. So going back to when I was trying to get well, I was going to meetings all the time. I had a sponsor. I was doing what she told me to do. I was working steps. And in fact, I've never stopped my entire life. I'm 43 years sober from alcohol and drugs. And I still go to at least 2 meetings a week, and I have a sponsor and I am a sponsor. But the other piece is culture, a lot of it. I knew inherently inside of me that was going to have to be a part of it for me because it called to me, even though I didn't grow up with it. When my friend's family took me to those powwows, I would go out as soon as grand entry happened, and I wouldn't stop till the last song. When they were taking the flags out and everything was turning off the lights, I felt like I went to a different place when I danced, that I was off the ground even. I didn't feel tired. I felt it in my bones. I say that sometimes when I feel something so deep like that. And so I had that experience as a young girl before I started drinking, and I remembered that. And so I reached out. Sometimes it wasn't, I was not having the greatest luck with some of the people that I reached out to. Thankfully, I did have some friends who would say, because I always tell the story about how this elder lady came up to a few friends of mine and myself, and she said, I heard you girls want to learn about culture, and if you want, come over to my house, you know, I'll start teaching you girls. But oh my gosh, she would yell at us and call us names and swear at us. And she told me that my little baby was going to die because I fed my baby when I was on my menstrual cycle, on my moon time. And I believed her because she was an elder, and I cried and I was depressed. I just thought I wasn't sleeping at night because I thought what that meant was my baby was going to die at SIDS. And one of my friends called, and I was crying and telling her about it. And she said, Cheryl, who are you going to see? And I told her the name of the person, and she said, oh my God, she's a raging alcoholic. What are you doing going to her? And I said, well, I didn't know, you know. And she said, I know some people that you should go talk to. No, take some tobacco, go see them. And they turned out to be people that became family to me, Kendall and Lillian Rice. And I went to Kendall, and he said, oh my girl, because I can just hear him still. He said, oh my girl, we have lots of words for the Creator. My favorite, he said, it's hard to translate into English because it means so much more than what English can say, but it's Gije Manidu, and it means something like kind, loving, compassionate Creator. He said, do you think a kind, loving, compassionate Creator is going to punish you or your innocent baby for something you can't even help? Because I had moved away from home. I was in the city and I didn't have any family around me to help me. And he said, no. He said, sadly, he said, there's a lot of our people who have started to believe in a fear-based God. He said there's a lot of reasons why that happened. You know, hundreds of years of boarding school and colonization and missionaries. He said, but the truth is, Gije Manidu, kind, loving, compassionate Creator, is a love-based God. He said there are people who have a fear-based God, but it's not us. So if anybody is ever telling you, if you do this or you don't do that, something really bad's going to happen, he said that's called fear-based. and you probably want to back up. If you see people being rigid and judgmental and hierarchical and excluding and things like that, that's all fear-based. You might want to back up. He said, I know you're really hungry for culture, so I'm giving you this advice. And if you will go somewhere and you're paying attention and you see people being loving and kind and explaining everything and including people and not shaming anybody, that's love-based. He said, and that's where you want to hang out. So, I mean, this is back in 1980. I was like, what elders talk love and fear-based, right? I felt so blessed to start having teachers like that in my life. So I ended up getting out of that really violent relationship and staying single because a lady reached out to me who did different kind of therapy. This is important because when I talk solutions, it has a great deal to do with what I believe the solutions are. But she did something at the time that I hadn't heard anybody ever talk about. It was called experiential therapy and shame-based therapy. And she did these weird little things with me that would like go way down deep inside. She told me, she said, you think this man or the alcohol and the drugs are the problem? They're not. They're a symptom. She said, we're going to go way down deep inside and find where it started. And she said, and we're going to process that. And he'll disappear. You won't even have to try. It'll be gone. And that's exactly how it happened. I started doing that kind of work with her and reparenting myself, and he had no more power over me. I was not afraid of him. That's how he would get me back kind of under his clutches, was because he would scare me. And then I would think, oh my gosh, if I don't do what he says, I'm going to die. Because that's what I learned as a 2 and 3-year-old, that was the fear. I was reliving that if I don't do what they say, I'm going to die. And sorry, I got to turn off my ringer here. That's another thing I should mention. I have 10 kids, and I have 41 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild, and I have another grandchild and great-grandchild on the way. So I have a lot of kids. I got to turn the ringer off. But what she told me also was, Cheryl, you need to stay out of relationships for a while, because who you're attracted to and who's attracted to you matches your level of woundedness. So you need to do that work first. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting the same kind of guys. And I believed her. And so I did what she said. And I stayed single for a while, and I worked on myself. And then I met somebody in AA. We got married, and we had a bunch of kids. And we had a really great life for a long time. But my husband had a lot of death happen, close death. He had 2 sons, and his mother died. And he relapsed with an addiction, not with alcohol and drugs, but another addiction. And it ended up threatening custody of our kids if he didn't go get some help, and he refused. And so I ended up being a single mom at a certain point when I was about 20 years sober. And then I had to start all over because of his gambling debt. We lost our home, we lost everything, all our vehicles. All in 1 year, it's like life, it just happens, right? To us and all the people that we work with too. But in 1 year, we lost our home, I lost my husband, all the vehicles, I got cancer, I was in a bad car accident, I couldn't work. And I had to start all over, to be homeless with my kids. And that was when a wonderful person named Dennis Hisgun reached out to me and said, if you come work for me, because I was sober, right? He said, I don't care if you don't have any training, you don't know anything yet, you're 20 years sober. If you come work for me, I'll pay for all your education, and you'll have a career. I'll even find you a place to live. And he did. And so we moved to White Earth and started over, and I ended up kind of working my way up through being a prevention worker and then a treatment counselor, and eventually running the first Women's Well Variety Lodge, a inpatient treatment center where women could bring their kids. And that was really something. But I also, in the course of the years, ended up doing a lot of work helping with ending physical and sexual violence amongst our people, especially for women and children, but also worked with men. And so I saw a lot, and I used every single experience I had growing up that I had worked through and processed. I used that more than any of my college education. And I did go to the University of Minnesota. So I just wanted you to know that background, so you have somewhat of an idea of why I feel so passionately about what I do and why I know what I know, because there's a lot of experience behind what I do today. That was learned a lot of times the hard way. So I have been for 15 years working with White Bison as a master trainer of their programming, which is culturally based help for people with addictions and unresolved trauma and grief. And I've been back in the metro area, Minneapolis and St. Paul, for about 7 or 8 years now, working as a treatment counselor for a while with moms with women who were pregnant or had newborn babies. And they were opiate and opioid addicts. And now I work in a program that helps just any Native women that need outpatient treatment. So I have really strong opinions about why culture is important and why you'll get a different result. I learned early on that if you bring something to people that's a fit, especially a cultural fit, you're going to get a different result. Part of my training with White Bison was that number one, you have to do a bulk of your own work first before you become a helper. Otherwise, the best case scenario is you're not working to the fullest that you could. Worst case scenario is that you're spreading your woundedness and you don't even know it. So that was a really important thing. But what they taught was there had been gatherings of elders through the years that were the formation of the Well Variety movement. And they said, in everything that you do, I started to learn these things. Always try to be in a circle. Always start with medicine, prayers, and songs. You'll get a different result. And then there were just a whole slew of other things. And I did it, and it did make a difference. And so when I did some work with at the state capitol, working with families who had kids with disabilities, they were trying to help these parents, learn how to be good advocates for their kids, and they were not bringing something that was culturally appropriate. And they were bringing the parents down to speak before the legislators. And they had all these little experimental minority groups they were doing it with. And one was Native families on reservations. And at the time I was working on Leech Lake Reservation and was working with families with kids with disabilities. And they said, we're going to fund this, and all you have to do is bring your parents down once a year to do this thing at the legislature. So we showed up. There was a big giant room, an auditorium, and up on a stage, and then up on risers on the stage was this panel of the legislators. And then they brought in all the minority groups together, and they said, okay, if you want to be heard, you're going to have to, jump up, raise your hand, be seen, don't be afraid to speak up. We walked in and they're saying all this stuff, and I'm looking at what's before me, all these linear rows of seats and stuff, and I'm like, I knew exactly how it was going to go. Everybody that I brought went to the back of the room, right? And as soon as people started jumping up and, you know, competing to be heard, I knew that probably nobody that I brought down there was going to be heard. It just wasn't a cultural fit for us. There was a group that got heard a lot. They were in the front row. It was the inner city African American parents. And they, at the time back then, this was a big deal. They were asking for computers so that they could figure out resources for their kid, and they could educate themselves, and they could stay in touch with other parents and stuff like that. It was a good thing what they were asking for. But my parents that I was working with didn't have cars, didn't have phones. Some of them didn't have electricity. And because of that, they had and lived so far away from hospitals that their kids ended up dying or getting their legs amputated and things like that. And I thought, wow, you know, and I went up to the people who organized it and I said, please don't do this next year for us. Just give us the money, please. I could use it. It would be better used, you know, paying for childcare and transportation and stuff back. What I was doing back on the reservation. And they said, we don't understand what you're talking about, Cheryl. We want this really good, you know, opportunity to your families. Why? I said, it's not a cultural fit. And they're like, we don't understand. And I said, I realize that. And she said, what would we have to do different if you would come back next year? And I said, if you bring us back next year, I'm going to ask that my parents, even if it's a real short bit of time, we get to meet with those legislators by ourselves. That we sit in a circle, that we share some medicines, prayers, songs, and I'll agree to come back. And so the next year we did. We got to meet with them by ourselves. I had all the parents go first, and the legislators went last. And when those, you know, we had the medicine, prayers, and songs. When the parents started sharing, they were from the heart. They were sharing about crying about how, because they didn't have a car, they couldn't get their kid to the hospital in time and they, you know, lost their leg, or because there wasn't a phone, their child died, or because there wasn't electricity, the oxygen machine that their kid needed wasn't working and they died. And guess how many parents shared? Every single one, right? When we were done, those parents came up, or those legislators came up to me afterwards and they said, Cheryl, we will never again vote on how money for disabilities gets spent without thinking of those people that you brought to see us today. And I felt like, ooh, drop the mic. Because there's a lot of really well-intentioned people who bring stuff to our communities and say, I don't know what's wrong with these, you know, with these Indian people. They just don't join, you know, they just don't come, they don't show up. And that's I'm learning all of these things, right? That how important it is to bring something that's a fit. Also, you know, I worked in other communities where I wasn't from, and I knew that it's on me. It's on me to learn the history of this community, to learn the language if I can, their own ceremonies. You know, I lived and worked in the Dakota communities in southern Minnesota for quite a few years, and I knew it was on me. I was an outsider, and I went to Sweat every week. I went and sat with the elders at their elders lunches and got to know them and everything about them. I gave myself a year to earn trust in the community, because probably the biggest hurdle first for anything in our communities is trust. And so I volunteered for everything. So they knew it wasn't a 9-to-5 job for me. I was at every march, at every feast. I would serve the elders. I would clean up. I would, whatever it took, so that the community saw I was there because I cared. In a sexual violence program that they couldn't get one single person to come into for 2 years, I had so many people coming in day and night and on the weekends that I didn't have enough time. Because if you bring something that's a fit, and I say this because these are cultural things, right? One of the things that I share when I do group in treatment is when we sit in circle. as the circle keeper, I go first, and probably to the level that I share and the person next to me shares. That's how the whole circle is going to go, right? But I have a responsibility to have done a bulk of my own work first before I'm even trying to be a helper. But culturally, it's considered, at least in the way that I've been taught, really disrespectful to ask somebody else to do something that you won't do. So when you get somebody who's trained in Western way of doing things, comes in and says, okay, I need you to spill your guts to me, but I'm not going to share anything with you about me. You're going to get a certain result, and it's not a good one. Because trust is huge, and understandably so in our communities, understandably so. So if, say, for instance, back in the day, two groups of people came together, maybe different tribes or whatever, they hold their hands up to show I'm not carrying weapons. Maybe they say how, whatever. But the person who is approaching holds their hands up first to say, I'm going to show you, you can trust me. Then the other people do it. So in the same kind of a way, in a group or a talking circle, I was taught in a culturally based way that you do need to share something only if it's of value to what you're trying to do, not for the purpose of you getting your therapy done in this group, but they need to know me. They need to know that I've walked where they've walked. They need to know that I've felt the things that they feel, and I'm going to get a different result. And I do. So when I trained with White Bison, what I learned was that all of our tribes really are people. If you go back far enough, everybody lived tribally. Everybody lived communally. Once upon a time, everybody lived close to the land and learned all of our big lessons by watching nature. We did it for a lot longer than, say, European people did. So it's closer to us. But when nature teaches those kinds of things, it's universal. You could have tribes from the mountains and tribes from the ocean and tribes from the prairie and tribes from the woodland. They're all going to be learning the same things about interconnectedness, polarity, balance, living in harmony. What affects one affects all. All of those things that if you spend time watching nature, our universe, our planet is a giving system. The more you give, the more you get. So if you are learning that way, you have an understanding that what's important isn't what you have, money, power, prestige, whatever. Our people would look at that and say, oh, they're so pitiful. They don't know that who we look up to, at least historically, were the people who gave away the most. And so when instead of being ridiculed for giving things away when then you're not being responsible, we would have really held that person in high regard. So what I'm trying to say with this is that there's a certain universal parallel for our tribes. Clearly, all of our tribes have different languages, different ceremonies, different songs, stories, traditions, but we all have certain really core things in common. And it's those kinds of things, especially if you're in a situation like I am. I work in the urban area. We have many tribes, many people of different tribes represented in my clients. And so it's on me to learn about who their people are and to the best of my ability, include things and present things that are going to speak to them. But it's always a winner if it's one of those natural laws, one of those things that's across the board. So in everything that I do, we do always start with medicine, prayers, and songs. It's really a beautiful thing to see people come to treatment and say, I've been to treatment 11, 12, 13 times. It never did anything for me till I came here. what you guys do, this made the difference for me. I just had someone who had been in drug court for 11 years and couldn't get graduated and came through our program. The other thing that we do is we work with people for a long time because it takes a while to build trust. And we got a lot of things to work through. And we're a co-occurring program. If you're in our program, you have to be working with somebody, not doing talk therapy, but doing trauma-based therapy. So it's EMDR, mind-body work, any of a number of those kinds of trauma-specific work. Because what happened to us, you know, we were a people who, it doesn't matter what tribe you came from, because we learned by watching nature, we learned the importance of living in harmony. We learned that if we harm somebody, we harm ourselves. That's what nature will teach you, right? And so we lived a whole different kind of lifestyle because of it. We learned really healthy coping skills through our ceremonies and our stories and our traditions in our language, because our languages are like so beautiful. They're like really spiritual. You look through the lens of your language, you know, at the world. And so if your language is something that's describing how you're so spiritually connected to every other thing around you, and that all these things around you are alive and they have spirit, you're going to behave in a different way. So we really had it going on. You know, sure, we're perfect, no, but we lived on this land for thousands and thousands of years, and we didn't destroy it, and we didn't wipe out, each other. So something did happen, though, and when the Europeans came, and the attempted genocide on our peoples happened. I don't know as many specifics in Canada, but I know that President Lincoln sent out a fact-finding committee to figure out what was going to cost more, to wipe us all out or to try to assimilate us with treaties and that kind of stuff. And it was during the Civil War where the government was really hard up for money, and they came back and they said, yeah, there's still some people here, out here they're going to fight, and it's not going to, it's going to be expensive, and there's going to be high cost in lives. So you probably want to try to go the treaty route and the assimilation route. And so, people, because of being, bombarded by the amount of people that were going west, and the never-ending stream of them, and the constant conflict and chipping away at our people's lands and defenses. Eventually, people believed them when they said, "Oh, as long as the grass grows and the water flows, we're going to give you everything you need. You can survive on this little tiny piece of land because we're going to give you all the free food and education and healthcare and everything." But of course, we all know that that's not how it went. The education was boarding schools, and the healthcare was Indian Health Service, and the food was commodity foods, and none of it was good for us. But here's the most devastating thing that happened: is that when they signed those treaties and people were put on the reservations, the government and the reservation agents had a power over our people. So when they came up with this idea to send their children to boarding school, if you refused, you get sent to prison in Alcatraz, or get locked up, or get sent to an Indian insane asylum, or have your food taken away till you're starving, until you agree to let your kids go. So for about 100 years, 1860s to the 1960s in the United States, and in Canada, it was until the 1980s, I believe. But they forcibly took our kids as young as 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. And there's not one single site of a boarding school that we found in the work that I was doing with white bison, where there wasn't horrendous abuses happening, and those unmarked graves. There were lists of people who were there that died of influenza or whatever, but there was all those other graves that weren't listed, because what would happen was, if you tried to speak up or to defend yourself or show an emotion, you got beaten. You were beaten sometimes almost to death, or some kids to death, and that's how they ended up in those graves. And so what was being taught to our kids was, don't talk, don't tell, don't feel. And terrorized into their little minds, because even if they didn't get punished, they watched the other kids go through it. And can you imagine the terror of watching that, or watching your siblings or your loved ones get killed, and then being told by those, nuns or priests or whoever, if you tell, you're the next one that's going to die. So, and the sexual abuse that in some of those places were 100%. So you heap abuse and trauma on children, and then teach them that the only thing to do for a coping skill is stuff it. Then you send them home to the reservation eventually, if they survive, and what's waiting for them? Oppression, racism, poverty, and so all these generations of wounded people coming home in the own. Oh, and I should say the other thing that's really important here is they outlawed our culture, our ceremonies, right? Where do we learn healthy coping skills? Our ceremonies. So they came home, they did not have healthy coping skills. They had horrendous amounts of trauma and abuse, and they were told to stuff it. Guess what's the perfect storm for mental health issues and addiction is? Stuffing, using that as your coping skill. Escape, run away, numb yourself out. It's no surprise that we got what we have right now. And that a certain amount of people, the vast majority of people who get abused don't turn around and do it, but a certain percent do. Pretty soon we've got a pretty bad problem. So it's not a surprise that our community is suffering the way that it is. Most people have many layers of trauma, starting unresolved trauma and unresolved grief, starting from childhood all the way into adulthood, many layers of it. So it's complex, it's deep. And any treatment program that doesn't address that, you're missing half the boat there, because that'll be a relapse trigger. Anytime one of those feelings gets triggered, you feel not just the event that's happening right at that moment, but you feel every other time that it happened, all at once. That's why it's so overwhelming. And so in order to build trust with people, we had to bring culture. And I will tell you that there are so many ceremonies that most people aren't even aware of. Ceremonies for a send-off ceremony, if you have your baby stillborn, or you have a miscarriage, we have a ceremony for that. Cedar healing ceremonies for, if you're carrying something that's too hard for you to bear, whether it's a feeling or a sickness or whatever it might be. Bear bundles that help you let go of things that you don't want to carry anymore that are heavy. Untying ceremonies that help you to disengage and get your DNA back from the people that you've been sexually active with. I mean, back in the day, it was when somebody died. Nowadays, people just have multiple partners, but it's still a thing, right? Wiping of the tears ceremonies, rites of passage, where we're giving our young people the message that you're important and we need you. Where do young people hear that kind of stuff, right? Where do they get to feel that? There are probably so many ceremonies. I could spend a whole hour just talking about those, and every tribe has them. Because back in the day, you didn't have to get to Creator through a priest or a pastor. Everybody had a direct connection. Everybody understood it. We did have an understanding about how to do something in a way where it's going to be effective and have meaning. And usually was spiritual. So if something came up and there wasn't a ceremony for it, somebody would say, oh, we're just going to do this in a kind of a sacred way. Boom, here's another ceremony. I do believe that our people were love-based people, that we weren't a fear-based people. And I think we took it on. And there's a sadness in that for me when I see it happen. I'm really grateful for the teachers that I had. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to also include dancing and singing. There's a lot of people who can get sober and in recovery just by going to ceremonies or just by dancing or singing. I think I see the best quality recovery in people that are doing a mixture of things, whatever works best for them. I don't think any one way is right for everybody. I think we need to bring a wide variety of things to people who are looking for recovery. But, you know, in our program that where I work at right now, we provide culturally based recovery meetings. We do a webinar meeting for people who are trying to deal with their loved ones' addictions. We have a well-grinding meeting for people who are working on their own recovery. We sponsor sweats, women's sweats once a month, men's sweats once a week. We do men's circles and women's circles. We do Cedar healing ceremonies. We sponsor other kinds of ceremonies. Because we know that when we provide that for people, it resonates with them. Even if you don't grow up with it, you feel it in your DNA. We are a people who are not meant to do things alone. It's in our DNA. We were communal people. We did things together. We helped each other. You know, back in the day, it wasn't artificial. It was just built into the day. Everyone worked together, and so as the women are gardening or they're canning hides or whatever, they're all talking and sharing and processing and giving good advice and mentoring each other. Same way with the men. You know, grandparents were raising kids because when you're a grandparent, you're coming at things with a whole different perspective than when you're a parent. We had the aunties and uncles be able to do kind of the more disciplinarian stuff, so the parents were free to just be that, you know, love and affection giving component. That was, you know, in the tribe where I come from and the way that I was taught. I don't think there's any one way that's right or wrong, but boy, do our tribal cultures have it going on because we learned by watching nature, and that's where it's at. And so, you know, in every different tribe, I could, you know, run down lists of examples, but it's on us. If we're working with somebody from a certain kind of a tribe, it's on us. Guess what? There's death marches in every tribe. We should know our history because we carry that in our DNA, but we also have the healing in our DNA. So all those ancestors that are standing behind us, that's just as real, right? We're not walking alone. So I think I covered pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope my message came through of why it's important to be as culturally immersed or as culturally based as possible with what you bring. Clearly, some things back in the day we didn't have that we have now. I think that rampant sexual abuse, people wouldn't have survived. If there was one person hurting somebody else, it was a threat to the whole tribe or the whole community. But we didn't raise people who were wounded monsters, you know, that came afterward. So, yeah, I think I'm ready for questions and comments.
Okay, miigwech, Cheryl. I have a couple questions, but feel free for those that have questions, just put them in the chat if you would for Cheryl. Cheryl, can you talk about spirit helpers? And then also, what is the best approach for someone who has a loved one who is having trouble with recovery? Like, what can a loved one do for their loved one?
All right. Well, I'll talk about spirit helpers first. I think everybody has them, whether they realize that or not. If you don't have a name, you can ask someone to help you with a name. Sometimes when that happens, you find out what your clan is. If you don't know what it is, if you're a tribe that has clans, some tribes have societies and different things, but I believe every one of us have helpers. Sometimes it's our relatives on the other side. One of the things that, because I'm somebody that has been able to see things like that since I was a little girl, sometimes like people who are on the other side will come to me and say, will you please, tell my loved one this or that? And I'll say, why don't you tell them? And they say, I try, but they're either they can't hear me or they're scared. And I feel so sad that so many of our people have kind of bought into dominant society that's afraid of anything that's spiritual. Like, oh my God, there's a spirit in the house. Get smudged down quick. In my experience, almost all the time, that's your relatives and your helpers trying to let you know they're there and they're supporting you. And they get really sad when we're out, like, get them out of here. We know people who are not afraid of the spirit world and the unseen world, and we sadly have been influenced, I think, by dominant society. So I think it's pretty easy to get in touch with who your helpers are if you just start putting tobacco out and be still and quiet in nature for a while, and stuff's going to start coming to you. One of the greatest things that I do is a sun up to sundown fast whenever I can, out somewhere in a state park where nobody's going to be around me, and beautiful, wonderful spiritual things happen. So also you can go to, if you feel like you need to, you can go to spiritual leaders, but that whole thing, there were always people who were probably more gifted spiritually that we would go to sometimes, but please know, you have a direct link to Creator in the spirit world. You don't have to go through someone else. Then the other part of the question is, what do you do if you have somebody who is struggling, either in active addiction or in recovery? Here's the hard part. It's not an easy answer, especially for some people, because I will tell you the biggest thing you can do is your own work. I can't tell you how many times my teachers would tell me the answers are all within, Cheryl, and I would be like, how do I hear that? You heal yourself, you heal the world, but you being an example is way more powerful than anything you can say. The reality is we can't control people. We can't. And the last person they're going to listen to is you, especially if you're a parent. They just shut down, or as soon as somebody starts to lecture, shut down. So what you can do is be a good role model. You can pray for them. You can take good care of yourself, so when they are ready, you can connect them with good resources. But for the most part, you can get support for yourself in places like Al-Anon and Well-Anon and support groups like that. And just make sure that you've educated yourself so you know where resources are and the steps that need to happen. So once they are ready, you can't force people, and they've even stopped doing things like, people always say, well, can't we do an intervention? They figured out a while ago that doesn't work, and it usually really backfires. Interventions just don't work. You can let somebody know how you feel, that you're afraid for them. But after that, let it go. Don't lecture. You'll drive them away. Just, do your best to not enable them, to soften, their consequences in their life, because people don't get ready for help unless they feel a lot of pain. And if we're rescuing them all the time, they're not going to feel it. So that's the answer to that one.
Okay, miigwech. Does anybody else have questions? And Becky, if you want to unmute folks, and if people want to speak up, unmute themselves or whatever, you can do that and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. We'll take
They should be good to go.
All right. So if anybody has questions for Cheryl, please unmute or put it in the chat. You're getting a lot of thank yous from people, Cheryl.
Thank you.
questions? There's got to be some questions.
While we're waiting for some questions, I want to share something today in the group that I was running. Moms were sharing about how we do birch bark scrolls to start changing our the picture that we have in our subconscious of who we are and what we deserve and where we're going. We call it birch bark scrolls. And one mom was sharing how she was doing it and her daughter was asking about it. So now all of her kids and her parents are doing it because she started doing it. And another lady was talking about how all of her grandkids know how to smudge and sing the water song and the tobacco song. And I just, it chokes me up because it's so true that what we do is very powerful. You can almost see it spreading immediately, like in these situations where you start going to ceremony, pretty soon your kids do. And it was that way for me. As a young woman, I went to a powwow one time and I saw all these families dancing together and laughing and all these extended families all sitting together and camping together. And I was the only one there for my family because everybody was down at the bar in my family. And I thought someday I want to be like this. This last year at LCO Honor the Earth powwow, homecoming powwow, because I started going, and then every year anybody in my family who sobered up, we had like 75 people in my family camped out, sober, dancing, singing, because one person got sober. So don't ever despair. What you do is important.
Migration, that's powerful. Isabel has a question. If someone is so disconnected to their culture, so assimilated, but struggling with addiction, where do we begin?
There again, start going to cultural things. You start practicing cultural things. There is no magical words that you're going to say that are going to get them to all of a sudden see the light. But they will probably start to take notice that if you're happy and your life is going good and you're using a lot of culture and you openly share about it, they're probably, the chances that they're going to look at that and say, oh, I want that. Or at the time that they finally bottom out, they'll remember that you planted a seed. So a lot of people are completely disconnected from their culture when they bottom out. But when they start coming around something like, say, I think I want to go to a sweat, or I want to get a name, or I want to go to a ceremony, they're going to feel that. Even if they're not sober yet, they can feel that. So, I guess that's my answer. It keeps going back to, you do it. That'd be the best thing.
All right.
I would say that you'd be surprised, if you reach out and find that there are people around you that you don't even know about. Like small towns that you think are all white, but really they're not. Like I find that like checking at Indian Ed at school, because the schools want to report who's Native in their school because they get extra money for it. You can find out how many other Native families are around if the Indian Ed program is doing any kind of activity. But social media is so helpful too, But yeah, if you want to reach out and find out that, back home on the reservation, but all around the urban areas, there's lots of stuff going on all of the time. We're really lucky in Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area, and St. Cloud and Duluth. Bemidji, there's tons of stuff going on all the time, even to do seasonal activities. That's very non-threatening. Oh, let's go to maple syrup camp, or maple sugar camp, or wild rice camp, or resources to provide rides. We make sure that we get people signed up for medical assistance, and if they have medical assistance, you can set up a medical assistance rides. even in the most remote places. We have people that come down from an hour and a half away from St. Paul, and they get a medical cab ride to go to treatment in St. Paul. So it's my understanding that if you're in the state of Minnesota, that's probably available. And we, if you're working with their care providers, cultural activities can really be viewed as a medical benefit. They know how to word it. If you're not sure about how to approach people, you can reach out to myself or other people that you might know or respect that, have been working as helpers with people for a long time. A lot of us have experience with knowing the vocabulary that you got to use to get services for people. Anybody that, a lot of hospitals have, I'm trying to think of the word, cultural brokers now. Big hospitals in the state of Minnesota have Native American cultural brokers, and their job is to make sure that medical services that Native people have access to them. And so they do a lot with culture and providing kind of case management services, I would say even. Step work with ceremonies and traditions. Yeah, I would say like what we do with this is to answer Emily, the wild variety movement. That is what it is. It's, I don't know if anybody's aware that Dr. Bob and Bill W, that the two middle-aged white guys that middle-aged, middle-class white guys that got AA started. It was just two drunks coming together to help each other, right? But you know what? They couldn't make it work. They kept trying to come up with some kind of a program. And then they went and spent time with Native Americans in upstate New York. And they learned about Native American spirituality. And they came back and plugged that in. And that's when the whole thing started working. And so one of my elders from LCO, they shared that with him. And said, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Native people. So when you hear Native people say, oh, no, AA is a white man's program, I said, well, not exactly. But there's a lot of, non-Native stuff going on in those programs. But it worked for me in the beginning. And then I switched over to Wild Variety. It was like I had never experienced any kind of recovery program that matched it. And they use the 12 steps, but they talk about it in a different way and they approach it in a different way. It's culturally based. So Medicine Wheel 12 steps for men and women and youth, and Mending Broken Hearts is the unresolved grief and trauma work. Mothers of Tradition, Fathers of Tradition, Sons of Tradition, Daughters of Tradition. Those are all prevention programs, and they're all set up so that it's a template. They teach you about the natural laws, and they tell you to plug in your language, your songs, your stories, your ceremonies, depending on what tribe you're working with or what tribe you belong to. So we have a website. It's called www.whitebison.org. Two messages I haven't seen yet here. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's a wonderful stuff going on in Duluth. You guys are rocking. You got a lot of good stuff going on up there. Part of me thinks, oh, I wish I lived in Duluth. Oh yeah, and there's the White Bison link there. Thank you, Becky. Well, Variety, you just spelled it the correct way. Yep. Well, Variety. And now we just started a brand new thing. In Minnesota, we started at Well-Anon for families of people who have addiction problems to learn how to stay sane and have healthy boundaries and healthy relationships with the other addicts in our life, not ourselves, but everybody else. So, and I do Well-Anon meetings on Zoom on Tuesday nights and Well Variety meetings on Thursday nights on Zoom. So if you ever want to hit up a meeting, I post the link on Facebook, but I could get the link to Ivy, and it never changes. It's the same for both nights, and it always stays the same. So she could put it in the email to you all.
Yeah, that would be great if you could email me like right after this session, because that's when I'm going to send the email.
Okay.
That would be really great. Thank you, Miigwech. All right. Well, we're at 7:20. No, 7:15, I guess. So I guess we can close out if there's any burning questions left or from anybody.
I would be okay if you wanted to give my contact information in the letter too.
Oh, okay. Miigwech. I will do that. I will do that. Thank you so much for being so generous
Yeah.
with your time and knowledge and sharing, and yeah,
So.
really appreciate everything that you've done and given a lot of people hope and wisdom. So I'm going to sign out here, folks, but want to say Chi Miigwech again, Apachigo Miigwech, Cheryl, and I will be sending out an email to all the registrants with the links and the survey link. Please take some time to do the survey. I will share the results with Cheryl and our funders, and it is anonymous. And also some of these other links that were put in the chat as well. So
just shared my Facebook. I host different groups on Facebook as well, like Women in Wild Variety, but I always post everything about that I ever find out about. So if you want to follow me on Facebook, I think I have 5,000 friends, so I might not be able to accept any more friend requests, but you can follow me and you'll still get to see it because I make it all public.
all right, great. You got a Gitchi Miigwech Auntie Cheryl from Niju.
Cool.
Yeah, a lot of Miigweches. So Miigwech everyone for attending. We'll try to host another, well, actually we have two upcoming, this was the first session in a 3-part session. I will also include those links in the email that I send out. There's going to be a lot of links in there, just forewarned. So our next one is with Sharon Day. And
Great.
yeah, so she's great. We've had her present before as well. So I will include those in the email that I send out, and it's free. Everybody's welcome. You just need to register. So Miigwech again for joining us tonight, and I'm going to let everybody go. Gigawabaman, everyone. All right, Miigwech.
I will email you the link right now.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay.
Ivy,
Gigawabaman.
Gigawabaman.